Hello friends, John here. I'm glad you could stop by. Today I'm going to give my review and talk about my feelings about the first season of House of the Dragon. I know I'm late in giving my review, but one of my other videos got a lot of interest on why I thought George R.R. Martin will never finish A Song of Ice and Fire. So I thought perhaps some people might be interested in seeing this. If you watched that video, I hope you liked it. If you didn't, I'll put a link below. I'll also put a link to another Game of Thrones video I did talking about how I liked that series or loved it, and then it turned into not liking it. On to House of Dragon. Out of 1 out of 10, I would give it an 8, which is very, very good. The Game of Thrones first season, after I watched it, I would have given that a 10. And a 10 would be excellent, where I went around and told people, if you haven't seen this, you gotta watch it. It's just fantastic. You will like something about it. Now, House of the Dragon, I would recommend it, but it wouldn't be such a strong recommendation. I would say, hey, you ought to give this a try. I think you may like it. Now, House of the Dragon was more narrowly focused. Everything was sort of pointing towards who was going to get succession. So any plot or subplot or any relationship was directly connected, like I said, linking down, going towards the succession once the king died. Whereas the Game of Thrones first season had multiple little subplots of the others and things that gave it more variety. Now, being narrowly focused in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but it just leads to a danger that it can be slow in spots. And there were a couple spots in House of Dragon I thought were a little too slow. They weren't so slow as to be boring and to put a stop in, like I'm going to stop watching it or I'm going to fall asleep during the show or something. There was nothing like that, but it's just a little bit quicker. Now, the show was heavily involved with interpersonal relationships of all kinds, family relationships. Parent, child, whether it be father and the daughter or mothers and their kids, brothers, then romantic relationships between husband, wife, lovers, and people that were lovers, perhaps they shouldn't be, uncle, niece. I don't know. I guess today, Targaryens, I guess it's okay with them, but not today. I don't know. With the show so heavily dependent on the interpersonal relationships, it was essential, critical that you have excellent writing, and that applies especially to the dialogue, but you also need excellent writing and a plot to have a reason why these people are talking about something that's engrossing to listen to. And I think it succeeded on this point. The more heavily something has action, it's not as critical to have such great dialogue. For instance, you get Train to Busan, all you have to do is say, hey, run zombies. Terminator, I'll be back. Of course, with the series dependent heavily on dialogue, and acting is a critical element also. I think all the actors in this, from top to bottom, even the minor character roles did a good job. None of them were standout as sort of average or miscast. I have to point out, of course, Paddy Considine. It was a critical role, key role. He did an excellent job in a character that changed so much, that aged and deteriorated, and he really sold that with his acting skills. I also want to point out Matt Smith. I had concerns about him when the casting was announced. Not so much with his acting skills, but I only seen him in one thing, in Doctor Who. I'm a big Doctor Who fan. Of course, if you say Doctor Who, I think Tom Baker. He's the quintessential Doctor Who to me. And he's the one I first saw when I was a kid. I may do a video on that. I'm getting off track. But in any event, I sort of typecast Matt Smith in my mind, and I was worried that when he came on screen, I would be thinking, uh-oh, Doctor Who, why is he riding on that dragon? Why didn't he just get in his TARDIS? He would get there faster. And it would disrupt my whole enjoyment of the show. But I actually didn't have that happen. When he first came on, I said, oh, there he is. But then he quickly just became Daemon Targaryen. And the next episode, I'm like, uh-oh, what's Daemon going to be up to now? He's going to be acting up, doing something. I mentioned that the show was too slow at times. Now I'm going to talk about it being too fast at times. It's like, hey, you're contradicting yourself. No, it's the time skips. At times they were jarring. It's like, well, wait a minute, who is that? That's a kid that's grown up now. Is that, okay, well, you get used to it, but it was jarring, as I said. But what especially affected me was the Stepstones. They were talking about it one time, And then all of a sudden they have a battle ending it. It's like, wow, that was fast. I mean, couldn't they have put some things in between? Couldn't they spread it out? I didn't read the source material, so I don't know. Any of you viewers that have read it, let me know. Could they have put more stuff in there and spread out the individual time periods? To put more in there to make it last a little bit longer? Could have spread out the Stepstones battle to give maybe some more action scenes, but just to give the impression of time passing. It's like, it's like, boom, years later, like, how many years was it? How long is its time skip? I don't know. I think I'll be better judge if I see next season to see, hey, they could have squeezed in and got more into the first season, spread out the first season, and I don't know. Well, just as this show was dependent on dialogue with the relationships, it's dependent on special effects because, of course, a big part of it is the dragons. And here, I think they did an excellent job. I went back and looked at some of the close-ups where you have the person right up to the dragon's face. They were good. The shots with the dragon flying over and you have the scenery, whether it be a castle, a town, a background, whatever. It's just great. Nowadays, the special effects are just so good, but that helps the sell since this is heavily dependent on the dragons. A wise decision they did, and I saw that George R.R. Martin said this in an interview, and I agree with him, is that they made the dragons different colors, different sizes, different shapes. What is it? Caraxes looks like a snake, Damon's. Like, you can see them and say, that's that specific dragon. Back in the Game of Thrones, they had 3, and sometimes my sister I watch with and say, which dragon is that? Like, I don't know. I don't know. One of the things George R. R. Martin said in an interview before the show aired had me worried. He said, people love the show because it had 3 dragons. They're going to really love this one because it's 17. It's like, I thought, well, I fell in love with season 1 before I even knew there were going to be dragons on it. I didn't read the books. I didn't know anything about it. Even when Daenerys got the dragon eggs, I didn't know they were going to hatch and I didn't know. But I fell in love with the characterizations and the plot. World building is what made me fall in love with that show. And I'm like, oh no, is that going to just entirely emphasize the dragons and that's it? You know, special effects are great, but you need a plot and characters and things of that nature because Transformers is like great special effects. Like, I want some intelligence in the plot, in the world building, the dialogue. But this does succeed, so that's another one of my preconceived things I shouldn't have worried about, just like with Matt Smith. Don't get preconceived ideas. Watch it and give it a chance. A nerdy thing that I noticed, and sometimes with me, I have like a nerdy logic. I don't know if other people feel like this, but notice things like there were saddles on the dragons. And it made me happy as a clam. I don't know. It's a little thing, but it's like, Daenerys climbing on top. Okay, maybe the first time you get on, you don't realize you can ride it. But if you're going to ride it continuously, make something to sit in. Come on. And I saw saddles. I'm like, oh, good. These people are smarter than Daenerys. My favorite scene is when Luke goes to get support. I guess it's Borros Baratheon. And as I mentioned before, I didn't read any of the sporting material. I didn't know anything about what the story was about. So when he arrives and you see Vhagar there, God, that thing's monster. He's huge. And you see him in the background. It's just really well done. You arrive in a storm and it's cloudy, foggy, and there's this big thing. And it's like, uh-oh. So you know, what's his name? Aemond is there. So what's going to happen now? At very least, there's going to be an argument. Has the Baratheon already committed to him? Is he going to kill him? Keep him a hostage? I don't know. Then when Luke left, I was figuring, well, maybe Baratheon will hold Aemond back because he doesn't want to start a conflict until maybe he can get a better deal out of their faction. Then all of a sudden in the storm, here comes Vhagar, and it's like, holy mackerel. And it was very well done with the in and out of the clouds and the storming and the raining. Just as an aside, my parents were in World War II, so I, even as a kid, used to like to read a lot of accounts. And one of the things involved certain scout planes would be go out looking for ships. And if enemy fighters came, they weren't strong enough to fight them, but sometimes they were able to hide in the clouds and get away from the fighter planes. And so I was thinking during this, like, well, maybe the littler dragon, it's not a very good fighter compared to that monstrous thing. Maybe they can hide in the clouds and escape. But when it came out, Magor came out and ate the poor little kid. I was like, holy mac, he swallowed that kid whole. Chewed that dragon in one little bite. It's like, it's very suspenseful, dramatic scene. One sort of nerdy thing is, how did Rhaenyra find out? I can't imagine that Aemon would go back and tell people, and then they would go over and tell Rhaenyra. Like, I don't know if that's in the books or whatever, and somebody knows. It's such a minor point, but anyway, that's an exciting way to wrap up season 1. Makes me look forward a lot to season 2. What I don't like nowadays is the huge time in between when one season is aired and then another. Back when I was a kid, every series started in September and ended in the beginning of summer. They had summer reruns, and then they started back up in September. I knew when it was starting. Nowadays, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 2.5 years, maybe it's a year and a half. You don't know when the heck it's coming back on. Another thing that's worried me, I just saw recently in the news where they're going to make it 2 episodes shorter next season. I'm like, wait a second. They're staying story-wise as to why they're doing it, but I am skeptical when they say such things. I have to wonder, is it budget constraints? Did they run into time constraint problems? Being able to finish? And so they're just shortening it because of that? And I worry about it. I hope that doesn't affect it, because I think even though Dan and Dave are horrible, horrible writers, the shortening of the seasons added into it. It was like a synergistic effect with them that made it even worse. So I'm hoping that it doesn't affect the plot, but we'll see there later. So thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions or comments, please put them down. Thank you.